Imagine waking up every day with a deep sense of peace and joy, no matter what challenges life throws your way. What if I told you that true happiness isn't something you chase, but something you can cultivate from within? In The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama, with Dr. Howard Cutler, unveils a revolutionary approach to living a happier life. It's not about external success or material gain, it's about mastering your mind, embracing compassion, and transforming suffering. In this video, we'll dive into the life-changing principles that can unlock lasting happiness, starting today. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Purpose of Life. In Chapter 1 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama dives deep into a question that many of us spend our lives pondering: what is the ultimate purpose of life? For so long, I thought the purpose of life was about meeting goals and achieving success, whether it was finishing a project at work or achieving personal milestones. It always felt like happiness was something that would come after reaching these goals, as though it were a reward for hard work and productivity. But as I read the Dalai Lama's perspective, something in me clicked. According to the Dalai Lama, the purpose of life is simple: seeking happiness. He argues that happiness is not a luxury, nor is it something to be earned through accomplishments. It is an inalienable right that everyone, without exception, deserves. This idea was liberating for me because it turned everything I believed about happiness upside down. Happiness wasn't something to be strived for or achieved through external accomplishments. It was already something within me, something that simply needed to be cultivated. One of the most profound takeaways from this chapter is the idea that happiness is inherent to our existence, not a reward that comes after reaching external goals. For years, I had believed that once I achieved that next big thing, then I would be happy. Whether it was finishing a major work project, getting a promotion, or buying something I'd wanted for a long time, I always linked happiness to external achievements. But the Dalai Lama offers a new perspective. Happiness is not something to be obtained externally, it is an essential part of being human. Just like food, water, and shelter, happiness is a fundamental right that every person deserves. This idea took me a while to grasp because it went against everything I'd been conditioned to believe. I had been chasing happiness in all the wrong places, trying to fit it into a series of checkboxes that never seemed to add up to true fulfillment. This notion that happiness is a birthright is incredibly empowering. It made me realize that happiness isn't something I had to earn or wait for. Instead, I could cultivate it right where I was. Whether I was stuck in a frustrating meeting or struggling to stay focused on a challenging project, I could make choices that would contribute to my inner happiness in those very moments. It wasn't about waiting for the end result or a perfect outcome, it was about how I could shift my perspective in the present. For example, whenever I found myself procrastinating or getting caught up in time management challenges, I would remind myself that I had the right to be happy right now. Instead of constantly measuring my worth based on my productivity or external outcomes, I learned to find joy in the process itself. I started taking small moments throughout my day to connect with the present moment, whether it was through a deep breath or taking a short walk. By practicing this, I found myself feeling more grounded and content, even during stressful times. The Dalai Lama emphasizes that our happiness is not only in our hands but is also a product of our attitudes and choices. This realization was eye-opening for me because it shifted my focus from what I need to do to how I choose to feel about what I'm doing. In the past, I had been obsessed with results, believing that if I did everything right, I would be happy when the task was complete. But now, I began to shift my focus to the idea that happiness is a way of being, not a destination. This is not to say that achieving goals is unimportant, but it helped me realize that chasing external markers of success would never lead to true happiness unless I learned to cultivate a sense of peace and joy within myself. The Dalai Lama's philosophy helped me break free from the constant race to achieve more. It taught me that no matter where I am in life, happiness is already within reach. It's not something I need to chase. It's something I need to recognize and nurture from within. The beauty of this philosophy lies in its simplicity. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of daily life, focusing on time management, productivity, and the never-ending pursuit of external success. But when we stop to remember that happiness is already an integral part of who we are, it's like a weight is lifted. We no longer have to prove ourselves or constantly strive for something that is just out of reach. Instead, we can focus on nurturing the inner peace and contentment that already exist within us. This perspective has been a game changer in how I approach my personal and professional life. I no longer measure my success solely by what I achieve or how much I do, but by how I feel about the journey itself. Every step I take, whether it's completing a task or managing my time, becomes an opportunity to practice happiness in its truest form. By reframing happiness as an inherent right and not something to be earned, the Dalai Lama offers a perspective that is not only liberating but deeply empowering. Happiness isn't just a fleeting emotion tied to accomplishments or external validation, it is an ongoing state of being that we have the power to nurture. This idea has completely reshaped how I view my work, my personal life, and even the challenges I face every day. By embracing the fact that happiness is not out of reach, I've begun to appreciate the present moment, focus on the process rather than the outcome, and recognize that I have the power to create my own sense of fulfillment, right now, in this very moment. Chapter 2: The Right to Happiness. The Dalai Lama emphasizes an essential idea that many of us overlook in our pursuit of happiness: the right to happiness. It seems like a simple concept, but it's a notion that many people don't fully grasp. Growing up, I always believed that happiness was something that came after achieving success, whether it was finishing a big project, landing a promotion, or buying something I'd been eyeing for months. These were the milestones that seemed to promise happiness, and yet, when I reached them, I often felt an emptiness, like the joy I expected from achieving them was short-lived. I would tell myself, once I hit this target, I'll be happy. But after the excitement of reaching that goal faded, I was left wondering why I didn't feel truly fulfilled. It's a cycle I'm sure many of us are familiar with, chasing the next achievement, thinking it will fill us with lasting satisfaction, only to realize that happiness is elusive. The Dalai Lama argues that this confusion stems from mistaking fleeting pleasure or material success for genuine happiness. In his teachings, he makes it clear that the right to happiness is not about the next big thing or external validation. It's an internal state, accessible to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. This was a powerful shift in my thinking. The idea that happiness wasn't tied to what I could acquire or achieve seemed almost radical at first. For so long, I had attached my self-worth and happiness to tangible achievements, assuming that a higher salary, a bigger house, or more recognition would somehow make me feel at peace. But the Dalai Lama explains that this is a misunderstanding of what happiness truly is. Real happiness, he argues, comes from inner peace, not material wealth or external accomplishments. It's a mindset, not a destination. This insight has profoundly affected the way I approach my goals, my work, and my life. Instead of constantly looking for the next thing to give me a sense of fulfillment, I started to focus on cultivating a sense of contentment from within. When I reflect on times when I reached milestones but still felt empty, I realized that it wasn't the achievement that I was really after. It was the peace and satisfaction that I assumed would follow the success. But what I failed to understand was that this peace didn't come automatically with the next promotion or the next task I completed. It had to be nurtured and developed internally. A key takeaway from this chapter is the idea that we have the right to happiness, regardless of our external circumstances. This was eye-opening for me, especially as I began to notice how much I tied my happiness to achieving external goals. In the past, I'd look at other successful people and assume that if I could just mirror their achievements, I would be as happy as they seemed to be. But what the Dalai Lama teaches us is that this approach is flawed. Material success and fleeting pleasures, like a new car or a promotion, are often just distractions. They might bring short-term satisfaction, but they don't provide lasting happiness. Real happiness comes from a deeper, more sustainable source: our ability to find inner peace. This realization made me reflect on how I had approached my career and personal life. I had always been focused on productivity, completing tasks, checking off to-do lists, and chasing bigger goals. But no matter how much I achieved, it never seemed to be enough. The Dalai Lama's message made me reconsider what I had been seeking all along. I didn't need more accomplishments to feel happy. I needed to focus on developing inner peace. When I think about moments in my life when external goals didn't provide lasting happiness, it becomes clear how much I had been overlooking the importance of inner peace. There were times when I'd work long hours to finish a project, only to feel empty once it was done. Or I'd reach a goal, like finishing a big presentation, and feel a rush of satisfaction, only for it to fade just as quickly. That fleeting sense of accomplishment left me feeling hollow, as if there was something missing. It wasn't until I read The Art of Happiness that I began to understand that the pursuit of external success had been overshadowing the pursuit of peace and contentment. The Dalai Lama's teachings helped me realize that happiness is not found in achieving more but in learning to be content and peaceful with what we already have. He teaches us that true happiness is an ongoing state of mind, not something we attain at the end of a checklist. It's about how we process our experiences, manage our emotions, and cultivate a sense of peace in our daily lives. Once I understood this, I began to apply it to my own life. Rather than striving for external success to make me feel happy, I started focusing on creating peace within myself, even in stressful situations. The Dalai Lama's insight has shifted the way I approach time management, productivity, and even procrastination. Before, I would measure my happiness based on how much I accomplished. But now, I understand that real productivity isn't just about ticking off tasks on a list. It's about doing those tasks with a sense of peace and purpose. I started setting goals that weren't just about achievement but about cultivating inner satisfaction as I worked toward them. Instead of pushing myself relentlessly, believing that happiness was something I'd find at the end of the process, I began to focus on how I could be present and at peace in the moment. This approach has helped me become more productive in a way that feels more balanced and fulfilling. I no longer feel the need to measure my happiness based on how much I can do or how many things I can accomplish. Instead, I look at how I'm approaching my goals. Am I bringing a sense of peace and calm into my work, or am I just trying to rush through it to get to the next task? Reflecting on this shift in my mindset, I see how much it has freed me from the constant cycle of doing more in order to feel happy. By focusing on cultivating inner peace and contentment, I've been able to find more joy in the everyday moments, rather than constantly chasing after the next big thing. The Dalai Lama's teachings have shown me that happiness isn't a destination or something I can acquire, it's a state of mind, and it's within my control. Now, instead of seeing external goals as the source of my happiness, I see them as opportunities to practice peace, balance, and fulfillment along the way. Chapter 3: A New Approach to Life. A perspective centered on the idea that happiness is not something we acquire through external achievements or material success but something we cultivate internally. This shift in mindset was particularly eye-opening for me. Growing up, I often saw happiness as something to be earned, something that arrived once I reached a specific goal or completed a certain task. Whether it was finishing a project, hitting a productivity milestone, or acquiring a new possession, I thought that happiness would naturally follow. But the Dalai Lama's teachings challenge that assumption. He emphasizes that happiness is a state of mind, and it's a mindset we can actively shape. This insight was incredibly powerful. For a long time, I had lived under the illusion that happiness was something that would appear only after I had achieved more, accomplished more, or acquired more. But as I began to internalize the Dalai Lama's teachings, I realized that the key to lasting happiness lies not in what we achieve but in how we approach life. The core message of this chapter is simple but profound. To experience true happiness, we need to cultivate a mindset focused on well-being. This means prioritizing internal qualities like mental clarity, compassion, and emotional balance over external markers of success. For a long time, I had been focused on getting things done, achieving my goals, and ticking off my to-do list. While those actions can certainly be fulfilling in the short term, I began to see that they were not enough to provide the lasting sense of peace and happiness I sought. The Dalai Lama's teachings have shown me that it's not the external accomplishments that matter the most but the internal qualities we nurture. When I started to prioritize my emotional and mental well-being, I realized how much more fulfilling my work and relationships became. It was like a weight had been lifted, and for the first time, I began to experience a deeper sense of contentment that wasn't dependent on the external world. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is the importance of mental clarity, compassion, and emotional balance. The Dalai Lama suggests that these internal qualities are essential for cultivating happiness, and I couldn't agree more. I've come to understand that when my mind is cluttered or when my emotions are out of balance, it becomes much harder to experience happiness. This was a hard lesson for me to learn, especially as someone who tends to focus on getting things done and pushing forward. In the past, I would ignore my emotional well-being in favor of meeting deadlines and achieving goals. But now, I recognize that without emotional balance and mental clarity, those goals become less meaningful. It's not about how many tasks I can complete, it's about how I approach each task with a clear mind and a compassionate heart. In my own journey, I've realized that when I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed, it's often because I haven't taken the time to cultivate inner peace. This is where small, simple practices come into play. The Dalai Lama encourages us to introduce small changes into our daily lives that can help us shift our perspective toward happiness. One such practice is mindfulness. I had heard about mindfulness for years, but I always thought of it as something for other people, those who were naturally calm and focused. But the more I read about it, the more I saw how powerful a tool it could be for someone like me, who often struggled with time management and productivity. Mindfulness, at its core, is simply the practice of being fully present in the moment, without judgment. It's a practice that doesn't require a major life overhaul but can be incorporated into daily routines. I started with small steps, like taking a few minutes each morning to sit in silence and focus on my breathing. Over time, I began to notice a shift in my mindset. I felt more grounded, more focused, and, importantly, more peaceful. Introducing mindfulness into my day didn't just help me feel calmer, it also made me more productive. I found that when I was present in the moment, I could tackle tasks with greater clarity and efficiency. Instead of rushing through my to-do list with a sense of urgency, I began to focus on each task one at a time. By practicing mindfulness, I became more aware of how I was feeling throughout the day. I started to notice when I was getting overwhelmed or stressed, and I could take a step back to regain my balance. This simple practice of taking a few minutes to pause and breathe helped me stay centered, even during the busiest of days. And as I focused more on mental clarity and emotional balance, I realized that my sense of well-being improved in all areas of my life. Another small practice that the Dalai Lama suggests is compassion, both toward others and ourselves. This was another area where I realized I had room to grow. I used to be my own harshest critic, constantly pushing myself to do more and be better. But over time, I came to understand that self-compassion is just as important as compassion for others. When I began to show myself more kindness and understanding, I noticed a shift in my overall outlook on life. Instead of feeling frustrated with myself for not meeting my own high expectations, I learned to accept where I was and appreciate the progress I had made. This shift in mindset helped me manage my time more effectively because I wasn't consumed by guilt or self-doubt. I was able to focus on the present moment, knowing that I was doing my best, and that was enough. One of the most significant changes I experienced after adopting this approach was a shift in how I viewed productivity. Rather than focusing on how many tasks I could complete in a day, I started to focus on how I could approach each task with presence and intention. This doesn't mean that I stopped working hard or aiming for success. It just means that I started to do it in a way that was aligned with my internal values and well-being. By focusing on mental clarity, emotional balance, and compassion, I was able to approach my work and my life with a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment. And in doing so, I began to experience the lasting happiness that the Dalai Lama describes in this chapter, a happiness that doesn't rely on external achievements but on the internal qualities that we cultivate every day. Chapter 4, The Sources of Happiness. Happiness does not come from external sources but is instead cultivated through internal qualities. This is a transformative concept that shifted my entire perspective. For much of my life, I was conditioned to believe that happiness was something that could be bought or achieved, whether through career success, material wealth, or personal accolades. I thought that if I just worked hard enough or acquired the right things, happiness would follow. But the Dalai Lama challenges this notion, urging us to look inward, not outward, for true contentment. He emphasizes that lasting happiness is found not in external achievements or possessions but in cultivating the inner qualities that shape our thoughts, emotions, and actions. The realization that happiness doesn't come from what we own or do, but from who we are internally was a powerful revelation. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is that compassion, patience, and positive mental habits are the core sources of happiness. This resonated deeply with me. I had always thought of happiness as something to be pursued externally, but the Dalai Lama's teachings made me realize that it's the simple, everyday qualities we nurture that matter the most. Compassion, for example, isn't just something we practice for others, it's a source of happiness for ourselves. When we act with kindness and empathy, we not only improve the lives of those around us but also elevate our own emotional state. I've experienced this firsthand. There have been countless moments where a small act of kindness, whether it was offering a compliment, lending a helping hand, or simply listening to someone, completely shifted my emotional state. Those small moments of connection have a profound impact, not only on others but also on how I feel in the moment. It's easy to get caught up in the rush of everyday life, feeling pressured to check off tasks or accomplish goals, but taking a moment to practice compassion can bring an unexpected sense of peace and fulfillment. It's a simple but powerful way to shift our emotional state and refocus our energy on the present moment. Similarly, patience is another key source of happiness that the Dalai Lama highlights. Patience isn't just about waiting for things to unfold, it's about how we manage our thoughts and emotions during that waiting period. I've often struggled with impatience, especially when it comes to work or achieving my goals. When things didn't go according to plan, I would get frustrated and start to feel anxious about the future. But learning to embrace patience has been transformative. The Dalai Lama teaches that true patience isn't about passively waiting for things to happen. It's about accepting things as they are in the present moment and trusting that they will unfold in their own time. This mindset shift helped me manage stress and anxiety more effectively. Instead of rushing or pushing for results, I began to practice patience in my daily life. Whether I was waiting for a project to come to fruition or dealing with a difficult situation, I reminded myself that things take time. Patience allowed me to approach each situation with a calm, clear mind, which not only improved my productivity but also helped me cultivate a sense of peace. Positive mental habits are another crucial source of happiness, according to the Dalai Lama. In the fast-paced, goal-oriented world we live in, it's easy to get caught up in negative thought patterns. We may constantly focus on what's wrong, what's not working, or what we haven't yet achieved. But the Dalai Lama teaches us that happiness is cultivated by replacing negative thoughts with positive, empowering ones. This doesn't mean ignoring challenges or pretending everything is perfect, but it means approaching life with an optimistic mindset. I noticed a significant shift in my own emotional state when I started focusing on gratitude and positive affirmations. Instead of letting negative thoughts dictate my day, I began to shift my focus toward what was going well. I would take a moment each day to acknowledge something I was grateful for, whether it was a small success at work, a kind interaction with a colleague, or even just the simple act of enjoying a cup of coffee. These small moments of gratitude helped me reframe my day, turning it from a series of tasks and obligations into a series of opportunities for growth and joy. The power of positive mental habits cannot be overstated. Incorporating these internal qualities into our lives isn't always easy, but the Dalai Lama provides actionable insights that we can begin applying immediately. One small change I made was to actively practice compassion in my daily interactions. Rather than going through the motions or focusing solely on my own needs, I began to pay closer attention to the people around me. I started to listen more attentively, offering my support or encouragement where needed. Even something as simple as smiling at a stranger or offering a kind word to a colleague can make a significant difference in how we feel. This isn't just about making others feel good, it's about how it makes us feel in return. Compassion allows us to step outside of our own concerns and connect with others on a deeper level, which creates a sense of fulfillment that no external achievement can provide. Similarly, practicing patience became a daily ritual for me. Whether it was in traffic, during a long meeting, or when working on a complex task, I reminded myself to breathe and embrace the present moment. Instead of letting impatience take over, I allowed myself the space to be present, to reflect, and to trust that things would unfold as they were meant to. This simple shift in mindset has not only reduced my stress levels but has also allowed me to approach life with greater calm and clarity. Finally, cultivating positive mental habits has been one of the most effective ways I've shifted my emotional state. I started small by practicing gratitude and focusing on the positive aspects of my life. Whenever I found myself slipping into negative thinking, I would consciously redirect my focus to something I was grateful for. This has had a profound impact on my overall emotional well-being. It's not about ignoring challenges, but about choosing to focus on what's going well and embracing a mindset of growth and possibility. These small, consistent actions have made a significant difference in my emotional state and have helped me cultivate a deeper sense of happiness. As the Dalai Lama teaches, happiness doesn't come from external sources, it comes from within. By nurturing qualities like compassion, patience, and positive mental habits, we can create the conditions for happiness in our lives. And in doing so, we shift our focus from what we don't have to what we can give and create, both for ourselves and for others. Chapter 5, The Obstacles to Happiness. In Chapter 5 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama takes a deep dive into the obstacles that stand in the way of our happiness, mental roadblocks that prevent us from experiencing peace and contentment. Anger, fear, and attachment are some of the most common barriers to lasting happiness. For much of my life, I found myself grappling with these emotions, thinking that external circumstances were the cause of my unhappiness. But as the Dalai Lama explains, these emotions aren't caused by the outside world, they are mental states that arise within us and, if left unchecked, can hinder our ability to experience true happiness. Anger is perhaps one of the most destructive emotions, not only to our well-being but also to our relationships. I've often found myself becoming angry over situations that were beyond my control, whether it was a missed deadline, a disagreement with a colleague, or something as trivial as getting stuck in traffic. In those moments, my mind would spiral, and I would allow anger to take over. It's easy to justify anger in the moment. After all, it feels like a natural response to frustration or injustice. But the Dalai Lama teaches that holding on to anger is like holding on to a burning coal, hoping the other person will feel the heat. The truth is, anger only harms the person who holds on to it. In my experience, when I allowed anger to take root, I found that it clouded my judgment, made me less productive, and drained my energy. The Dalai Lama's wisdom helped me realize that letting go of anger wasn't about suppressing it or ignoring it. It was about choosing not to let it control me. I began practicing mindfulness whenever I felt anger rising within me, taking a moment to pause, breathe, and ask myself whether this emotion was serving me in any way. Slowly, I started to detach from the need to react impulsively to every irritation, and instead, I chose to focus on maintaining my inner peace. Fear, another powerful emotion discussed in the chapter, can also be a significant barrier to happiness. Fear often manifests as anxiety about the future or dread of the unknown. I've experienced this fear countless times, whether it was about taking on a new project, making a big life decision, or simply worrying about what might go wrong. Fear can paralyze us, keeping us stuck in a cycle of procrastination or indecision. It's easy to become overwhelmed by the what-ifs and imagine worst-case scenarios, but this fear is rarely based on reality. The Dalai Lama emphasizes that fear is born from the mind's tendency to create stories that are often exaggerated and not grounded in fact. By focusing too much on what might happen, we lose sight of what is happening in the present moment. Overcoming fear, as the Dalai Lama suggests, begins with recognizing that fear is a mental construct. I found that by shifting my attention away from fear and focusing on the present moment, I can break free from its grip. When I catch myself spiraling into fear-based thinking, I remind myself that fear is just a feeling, not a fact. Practicing mindfulness and deep breathing has helped me reset my mindset and approach challenges with a clearer, calmer perspective. Then, there's attachment, another major barrier to happiness. Attachment, in this context, refers to our tendency to cling to things, people, or outcomes in the belief that they are essential to our happiness. I've often found myself attaching my sense of worth to external things, whether it was the success of a project, the approval of others, or the accumulation of material possessions. The Dalai Lama teaches that attachment creates suffering because it keeps us dependent on things that are beyond our control. We become so fixated on maintaining a certain state of affairs that we lose sight of the impermanence of life. For example, I once had an intense attachment to a job that I thought defined my worth. I spent years working tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, believing that reaching a certain position would bring me happiness. However, when I finally reached that goal, I realized it wasn't as fulfilling as I had imagined. The sense of achievement quickly faded, and I was left feeling empty, as if I were still chasing something elusive. This was a wake-up call for me. Happiness could not be dependent on external circumstances or achievements. The Dalai Lama emphasizes the importance of letting go of attachments in order to find true contentment. This doesn't mean we shouldn't care about people, goals, or accomplishments, but rather that we should approach them with a mindset of non-attachment, understanding that our happiness is not contingent on them. The actionable tip that the Dalai Lama provides in this chapter is one that I've found to be particularly valuable: the practice of letting go of attachments and negative emotions. While it's not easy, it is entirely possible with consistent practice. One of the most effective ways I've learned to let go of negative emotions is through mindfulness meditation. When I feel anger, fear, or attachment creeping into my mind, I pause and take a few deep breaths. I focus on the sensation of the breath moving in and out, and I allow myself to become present in the moment. I remind myself that my emotions are not who I am, they are temporary states that will pass. Instead of attaching to them or letting them dictate my actions, I choose to observe them without judgment and allow them to dissolve naturally. This practice of non-attachment has been incredibly liberating. It has allowed me to experience life with greater peace and clarity, unencumbered by the mental clutter of anger, fear, and attachment. Another practical tip for overcoming these obstacles is to develop a sense of perspective. When faced with difficult emotions, it's easy to become consumed by them. But by taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, I've found that it's easier to see things from a more balanced perspective. For instance, when I catch myself becoming angry or anxious, I remind myself that these emotions are just a small part of a much larger journey. They are temporary, and they do not define my overall well-being. This shift in perspective has helped me not only manage my emotions but also prevent them from controlling my actions. Ultimately, overcoming the obstacles to happiness, anger, fear, and attachment is about reclaiming control over our mental states. It's about realizing that we have the power to choose how we respond to life's challenges. By practicing mindfulness, letting go of attachments, and cultivating emotional resilience, we can break free from the mental barriers that prevent us from experiencing lasting happiness. The Dalai Lama's teachings remind us that happiness is not something that happens to us, it is something we create from within. By clearing the mental obstacles that cloud our minds, we make space for the peace and contentment that come from true inner happiness. Chapter 6: Transforming Suffering. In Chapter 6 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama addresses a fundamental aspect of human existence: suffering. It's something we all experience, whether it's physical pain, emotional turmoil, or the inevitable challenges that come with life. What makes suffering particularly difficult to bear is our tendency to resist it, to wish it away, or to see it as a sign of failure or misfortune. But the Dalai Lama presents a transformative perspective on suffering. Instead of viewing it as something to avoid or conquer, we can see it as an opportunity for growth. This shift in perspective was one of the most powerful realizations I had while reading this chapter, and it changed the way I approach every challenge in my life. For a long time, I believed that happiness meant the absence of suffering. I thought that once I achieved certain milestones, whether it was career success, personal achievements, or even maintaining good health, I would be free from the struggles and difficulties that life inevitably throws at us. But I soon realized that this was an unrealistic expectation. Life is full of ups and downs, and suffering is a natural part of the human experience. Trying to escape it only creates more frustration and dissatisfaction. The Dalai Lama teaches that the key is not to avoid suffering but to understand it and learn from it. He suggests that suffering, when viewed through the right lens, can be a profound teacher, helping us to develop wisdom, compassion, and resilience. One personal experience that comes to mind is a period in my life when I was facing immense stress and anxiety due to work pressures. I felt overwhelmed and out of control, constantly worrying about meeting deadlines and fulfilling expectations. At that time, I viewed my suffering as a burden, something that was holding me back from achieving my goals. I was so focused on trying to eliminate the stress that I couldn't see the potential lessons hidden within it. However, as I started practicing some of the techniques outlined by the Dalai Lama, I began to shift my perspective. Instead of seeing the stress as something to escape from, I started to view it as an opportunity for growth. I asked myself, what is this stress teaching me? What can I learn from this experience? This reframing of my struggles was incredibly liberating. It helped me to view my work challenges not as obstacles but as moments of personal development. Over time, I started to handle stress in a healthier way, by acknowledging it, learning from it, and letting it go rather than letting it control me. The Dalai Lama emphasizes that suffering, whether big or small, provides us with the chance to cultivate qualities like patience, resilience, and empathy. For example, the pain of a personal loss or the frustration of a failed project can be opportunities for self-reflection. We can ask ourselves, how did we respond to this? Did we react with anger or frustration, or did we take a step back to process and learn from the experience? Through such moments, we can strengthen our emotional intelligence and become better equipped to face future challenges. It's not about avoiding suffering but about building the mental and emotional tools to navigate it effectively. One actionable tip that the Dalai Lama offers is to reframe our own struggles as opportunities for growth. This concept isn't about pretending that suffering isn't real or minimizing its impact. It's about shifting our focus from the pain itself to the potential for personal development that lies within it. The next time you find yourself facing a difficult situation, try asking yourself, what can I learn from this? How can this experience make me stronger? By reframing your struggles in this way, you start to see them not as setbacks but as stepping stones toward a better version of yourself. This approach doesn't eliminate the discomfort of suffering, but it does change how you relate to it. Instead of letting suffering define you or limit your potential, you can use it as a tool for transformation. This perspective also allows us to practice greater compassion for ourselves and others. When we view suffering as a natural part of life, we become more understanding of the struggles others face. I found that when I experience hardship, I am more empathetic toward others who are going through similar situations. This sense of shared humanity creates a deeper connection and a greater sense of compassion. The Dalai Lama suggests that by recognizing our own suffering, we are better able to connect with the suffering of others and offer them the support and understanding they need. It's a reminder that no one is immune to suffering, and in this shared experience, we can find unity and mutual support. Another important aspect of transforming suffering is the role of mindfulness. Mindfulness helps us to stay present with our emotions rather than becoming overwhelmed by them. In times of suffering, it's easy to spiral into negative thinking and ruminate on past mistakes or future uncertainties. Mindfulness teaches us to stay grounded in the present moment, observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment. This practice enables us to detach from the emotional weight of suffering, allowing us to process it in a more balanced way. Over time, mindfulness has helped me to become more aware of how I respond to challenges. Instead of reacting impulsively, I've learned to pause, breathe, and center myself before making decisions or taking action. This simple practice has made a huge difference in my ability to handle stress and adversity with greater calm and clarity. The Dalai Lama's teachings in this chapter have encouraged me to view suffering not as something to avoid but as something to embrace. It's a part of life, and it's through our struggles that we find opportunities for personal growth. This shift in perspective has been transformative. Instead of feeling defeated by difficulties, I now see them as valuable lessons. When faced with challenges, I remind myself that I am being given the opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. It's not about being happy all the time, but about learning how to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs with grace and resilience. As the Dalai Lama suggests, suffering, when understood and embraced in the right way, can be the very thing that leads us to greater happiness. By changing the way we view suffering, we can transform it into a powerful catalyst for personal and spiritual growth. Chapter 7, The Role of Compassion. In Chapter 7 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama delves into the powerful role that compassion plays in achieving lasting happiness. He emphasizes that compassion is not just an abstract, feel-good concept but a fundamental practice that can transform our lives. Compassion is often associated with kindness toward others, but the Dalai Lama highlights the importance of extending that same compassion inward. It's easy to overlook the need for self-compassion when we're caught up in our busy lives, striving to meet deadlines or achieve personal goals. However, without kindness toward ourselves, it's impossible to truly experience happiness, no matter how much success we achieve. This idea struck a chord with me, as I realized that I had been neglecting my own emotional needs in the pursuit of external accomplishments. The moment I began to practice self-compassion, I noticed a shift in my sense of well-being. The Dalai Lama reminds us that compassion is not just an emotional response, it's an action. He encourages us to cultivate a habit of practicing daily acts of kindness, not only to others but also to ourselves. This could be as simple as offering a kind word to someone who's having a bad day or taking a moment to acknowledge your own achievements. For instance, when I'm feeling overwhelmed with work or personal obligations, I sometimes forget to appreciate the progress I've made. Instead, I tend to focus on what I haven't accomplished yet, which creates a sense of dissatisfaction. But when I consciously take a moment to recognize my hard work, I begin to feel a sense of fulfillment. It's a small act of self-compassion that nurtures happiness from within. This shift in perspective has made me more patient and understanding with myself, which in turn has allowed me to show more empathy toward others. When you treat yourself with kindness, you're naturally more inclined to extend that same understanding to the people around you. As the Dalai Lama points out, compassion is also about recognizing the humanity in others. It's easy to become absorbed in our own lives, especially when we're juggling responsibilities and goals. But taking the time to actively listen to others, to genuinely care about their well-being, can have a profound impact on both their happiness and our own. I recall a time when I was feeling particularly stressed out, trying to balance multiple projects. I was absorbed in my own problems, barely noticing the struggles of those around me. However, one afternoon, a friend reached out to share their own difficulties, and I realized that by listening with full attention, I could offer them comfort. What started as a simple act of being present for someone else lifted my spirits as well. It reminded me that happiness is not a solitary pursuit. By contributing to the well-being of others, we nurture our own emotional health. One of the most powerful ways to practice compassion is by offering help, even in small ways. It doesn't always have to be a grand gesture. Sometimes, the most meaningful acts of kindness are the simplest. For example, you could help a colleague who's struggling with a task or offer a compliment to brighten someone's day. I found that these small acts of kindness, though they may seem insignificant at the time, have a profound ripple effect. The more I practice compassion, the more I feel connected to others, and the more I experience a sense of fulfillment. It's a reminder that happiness doesn't come from accumulating achievements or material possessions, but from the connections we build with those around us. The Dalai Lama stresses that compassion is not just for others, it's something we must practice toward ourselves as well. Being kind to yourself when you're struggling, acknowledging your emotions without judgment, and allowing yourself to rest are essential acts of self-compassion. Another actionable tip that the Dalai Lama offers is to develop the habit of active listening. In a world where we're often distracted by our phones or our thoughts, giving someone our full attention is an act of profound compassion. When we truly listen to others, we not only show them that we care but also create space for them to share their feelings and experiences. Active listening fosters deeper connections and makes others feel valued, which in turn boosts our own happiness. It's easy to get caught up in our own narratives and problems, but the act of stepping outside of ourselves to be present for others is a powerful way to cultivate compassion. Similarly, practicing empathy allows us to connect with others on a deeper level. Rather than judging someone based on their actions or opinions, we can try to understand their perspective. This shift in mindset not only improves our relationships but also helps to reduce feelings of anger or frustration. When we recognize that everyone has their own struggles, it becomes easier to approach others with kindness and understanding. I've noticed that when I approach people with empathy, I'm less likely to feel irritated or defensive, even in difficult situations. It's a simple yet transformative practice that leads to greater harmony and happiness. The Dalai Lama also encourages us to engage in acts of kindness without expecting anything in return. In a society that often values transactional relationships, practicing selfless kindness can be a challenge. But the Dalai Lama explains that true compassion arises when we help others without the expectation of recognition or rewards. I've found that when I engage in random acts of kindness, whether it's offering a smile to a stranger or volunteering my time, it not only benefits the recipient but also creates a sense of joy and fulfillment within myself. These acts serve as reminders that happiness doesn't depend on external validation, but on our ability to contribute positively to the lives of others. Incorporating these practices into our daily lives may seem like a small change, but it has a profound impact on our overall well-being. By practicing compassion toward ourselves and others, we create a foundation for lasting happiness. It's not about grand gestures or monumental changes, but about cultivating a habit of kindness in every moment. As we do so, we build a sense of inner peace and emotional balance that allows us to navigate life's challenges with greater ease and joy. The more we practice compassion, the more we experience a deep sense of fulfillment that can sustain us through even the toughest times. In this way, the Dalai Lama reminds us that happiness is not something we find outside of ourselves, but something we nurture within. Through daily acts of kindness and compassion, we can transform our lives and the lives of those around us. Chapter 8: Training the Mind. In Chapter 8 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama emphasizes the importance of training the mind to foster a mindset conducive to happiness. He asserts that mindfulness and mental discipline are not merely helpful tools, but essential components for cultivating lasting happiness. While many of us are quick to focus on external factors, such as career achievements, relationships, or material possessions, as the sources of our happiness, the Dalai Lama points out that true happiness stems from within. This internal happiness is directly linked to the way we manage our thoughts and emotions. This realization was a game changer for me. For much of my life, I had assumed that happiness was something that just happened when everything fell into place externally, but I've come to understand that it's the way we train our minds that shapes our emotional state. The Dalai Lama encourages us to consciously train our minds to focus on positive, compassionate thoughts rather than negativity. This process doesn't happen overnight, it requires practice and patience. He compares it to training for a marathon. You don't expect to run 26 miles on your first day. Similarly, cultivating a positive and mindful state of mind requires consistent effort. One key idea that stood out to me was how he discussed the habitual nature of our thoughts. Our brains tend to gravitate toward negativity and worry, often focusing on perceived shortcomings, failures, or anxieties about the future. However, by consistently shifting our focus to positive thoughts, we can rewire our brains over time to foster a more compassionate and peaceful mindset. It was a tough realization for me to admit that I had been allowing negativity to consume my thoughts without actively doing anything to change it. But the more I understood this concept, the more empowered I felt to take control of my thoughts. One of the most effective ways the Dalai Lama suggests to train our minds is through mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in the moment, without judgment or distraction. It's about observing your thoughts and emotions without attaching labels of good or bad to them. This practice helps you cultivate awareness of your inner state, allowing you to catch negative thought patterns before they take over. For instance, when I find myself stressing over a deadline or worrying about a future project, I've started practicing mindfulness by pausing and acknowledging those thoughts without judgment. I simply observe them, allow them to pass, and gently guide my focus back to the present moment. Over time, this has helped me reduce the intensity of my anxiety, creating space for more positive and productive thinking. In addition to mindfulness, the Dalai Lama also highlights the importance of mental discipline. This means actively choosing to redirect your focus away from negative or harmful thoughts and instead, consciously cultivating thoughts of compassion, gratitude, and calm. For example, whenever I find myself in a negative spiral, perhaps feeling frustrated with a task or disappointed with a situation, I make it a point to redirect my focus toward gratitude. I think about the positive aspects of the situation, whether it's the opportunity to learn or the support of those around me. This simple shift has had a profound effect on my emotional state. I no longer allow negativity to dictate my reactions. Instead, I take charge of my thoughts, choosing to focus on what serves me rather than what holds me back. One actionable tip the Dalai Lama offers is meditation. Meditation provides a structured way to train the mind, helping to cultivate both mindfulness and mental discipline. When I first began meditating, I found it difficult to quiet my mind. Thoughts would constantly pop up, and I would become frustrated with myself for not being able to stay focused. But over time, I learned that meditation isn't about stopping your thoughts, it's about observing them and gently guiding your focus back to your breath. It's a practice of acceptance. I found that just a few minutes of meditation in the morning or before bed can help center me and create a sense of calm throughout the day. The Dalai Lama recommends starting with short sessions and gradually increasing the duration as you feel more comfortable. With consistent practice, meditation helps train the mind to focus on the present moment and fosters a sense of inner peace. Another powerful tool the Dalai Lama suggests is journaling. Journaling provides a means of reflecting on your thoughts and emotions, helping to cultivate self-awareness. It's a practice that encourages you to examine your experiences, your challenges, and your growth. Personally, I've found journaling to be an incredibly effective way to process my feelings and gain clarity on difficult situations. By writing down my thoughts, I can step back and reflect on them objectively, which allows me to shift my perspective. If I'm feeling stressed, I might write about what's causing that stress and explore ways to reframe the situation in a more positive light. This practice not only helps to clear mental clutter but also encourages a more mindful approach to life. Writing has given me a deeper understanding of myself and has allowed me to address negative thought patterns before they spiral out of control. One of the most significant insights the Dalai Lama offers is that we have the power to change our minds. Happiness isn't something that simply happens to us, it's something we actively cultivate. By training our minds to focus on positive, compassionate thoughts and practices, we create a foundation for lasting happiness. This process requires dedication and effort, but the rewards are profound. As I've learned through my own experience, the more we practice mindfulness and mental discipline, the more we develop a sense of control over our emotional state. We no longer react impulsively to challenges or setbacks. Instead, we approach them with clarity, compassion, and resilience. To encourage mindfulness and mental discipline, the Dalai Lama offers the actionable tip of incorporating small, consistent practices into our daily routines. Whether it's starting the day with a few minutes of meditation, writing down 3 things you're grateful for, or taking a moment to check in with your emotions throughout the day, these small acts of mindfulness add up over time. They help create a mental environment where happiness can thrive. By taking charge of our minds and choosing to focus on positive, compassionate thoughts, we lay the foundation for a more joyful, peaceful life. As the Dalai Lama reminds us, happiness is a practice, not a destination. By training the mind, we can create a life filled with contentment and fulfillment. Chapter 9, The Importance of Relationships. In Chapter 9 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama underscores the critical role that relationships play in our overall well-being. Healthy, supportive relationships are not just a luxury, they are a fundamental source of sustained happiness. As much as we might focus on personal achievements, professional success, or material wealth, the Dalai Lama reminds us that true happiness often comes from the people around us. This idea resonated deeply with me, especially in light of how often we undervalue relationships in the hustle to succeed or achieve. We might convince ourselves that our work is the most important priority, but the Dalai Lama suggests that the connections we cultivate with others are what ultimately give life meaning. I've come to realize, especially in recent years, how profoundly my relationships have impacted my own happiness. For much of my life, I believed that independence was the key to success. I focused on my work, my goals, and my own personal growth, often at the expense of my relationships. I convinced myself that if I could just accomplish enough, I would feel fulfilled. But I began to notice that no matter how many tasks I checked off my to-do list or how much I advanced in my career, something was missing. It wasn't until I started prioritizing my relationships, whether it was spending time with friends, family, or colleagues, that I began to feel a true sense of fulfillment. The more I invested in others, the more I realized how much happiness could be found in these deep, meaningful connections. The Dalai Lama suggests that forming supportive relationships and investing in others is not just about receiving support, it's also about offering it. True, fulfilling relationships are built on a foundation of mutual care and respect. It's not just about having people around for when you need them, but also about being there for others when they need you. Over the years, I've learned that offering kindness and compassion to others, whether through listening, providing support during difficult times, or simply offering encouragement, creates a positive cycle of happiness that feeds back into our own lives. It's easy to think of relationships as something we get from others, but the Dalai Lama points out that when we give, we're the ones who often benefit the most. Nurturing relationships requires an active investment of time, energy, and emotion, but the return is immeasurable. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is that relationships are not one-dimensional, they require effort, attention, and care. As I've worked to deepen my own relationships, I've realized that it's not just about spending time together, but about making that time meaningful. Quality time, not quantity, is what builds lasting, supportive relationships. For example, I found that simply being fully present with someone, whether in a casual conversation or during a more intimate discussion, can strengthen the bond between us. In an era of constant distractions, where we're often multitasking or distracted by our phones, giving someone your full attention is a powerful act of love and respect. These small gestures go a long way in showing others that they are valued and cared for. The Dalai Lama also touches on the importance of understanding the interconnectedness of all people. While this idea may initially sound abstract, it is deeply practical when applied to our everyday lives. By recognizing that we are all part of a larger whole, it becomes easier to extend empathy and compassion to others. This broader perspective helps shift our focus away from self-centered desires or frustrations and instead encourages us to view others with a sense of shared humanity. For instance, when I interact with people now, I try to remember that their struggles, fears, and hopes are not so different from my own. This simple shift in perspective has allowed me to build more authentic connections with others, making my relationships more meaningful and rewarding. Another significant takeaway from this chapter is the importance of forgiveness within relationships. The Dalai Lama emphasizes that holding on to anger, resentment, or grudges can be detrimental to our own happiness. I've learned this lesson the hard way. Early in life, I struggled with letting go of past conflicts, holding on to negative feelings that only served to weigh me down. But when I made a conscious effort to forgive both others and myself, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior, it simply means freeing yourself from the grip of negativity. By letting go of resentment, I was able to open myself up to deeper connections with others, fostering trust and emotional intimacy. Investing in relationships also means knowing when to nurture them and when to let go. Not all relationships are meant to last forever, and the Dalai Lama teaches us that sometimes, the most compassionate thing we can do is walk away from relationships that no longer serve us. This idea took me a long time to accept. For years, I held on to friendships and professional connections out of a sense of obligation, even when those relationships were no longer healthy or fulfilling. But as I learned to let go of toxic dynamics, I began to make space for relationships that truly nurtured my growth and happiness. It's not always easy, but the Dalai Lama's teachings remind us that investing in our emotional well-being sometimes means making difficult choices about the people we allow into our lives. As I reflect on how nurturing my relationships has impacted my happiness, I can't help but see the undeniable link between the two. Relationships are not just a side aspect of life, they are central to our happiness. Whether it's the support of a close friend, the guidance of a mentor, or the love of family, these connections provide the foundation for a meaningful and fulfilling life. And the more we invest in others, the more we enrich our own sense of purpose and joy. I've learned that the happiness I experience isn't just about my personal achievements, but about the people I share those moments with. It's through giving and receiving love, kindness, and support that we truly find fulfillment. The Dalai Lama's teachings in this chapter have inspired me to continue nurturing my relationships with greater intention, as I know that these connections are not just sources of happiness, they are the very essence of it. Chapter 10, The Practice of Happiness. In Chapter 10 of The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama emphasizes a powerful and often overlooked truth: happiness is not a final destination, but a lifelong practice. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking happiness is something we achieve and then enjoy, like a trophy we've earned. Many of us operate under the assumption that once we reach a certain goal, be it a career milestone, a financial target, or a personal achievement, we'll finally feel content. But as the Dalai Lama teaches us, this kind of thinking overlooks the most important aspect of happiness. It's a continual process, not a one-time event. True happiness, he argues, comes from developing consistent habits that support our well-being, rather than relying on external factors or momentary triumphs. This perspective has made me rethink the way I approach both my personal life and my professional goals. For years, I focused on achieving success as a means to happiness. I thought that once I hit a certain target, whether it was finishing a major project, securing a promotion, or simply getting through a tough week, I could take a break and relax, feeling accomplished and at peace. But I've learned that happiness doesn't come from achieving a goal and then stopping. It's a constant, ongoing process that requires daily attention and effort. The Dalai Lama's teachings have encouraged me to recognize that while external success can provide brief moments of joy, it's the daily, mindful practices that foster lasting contentment. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is the importance of consistent actions, such as practicing compassion, mindfulness, and gratitude. These aren't just buzzwords, they're actionable habits that require daily investment. I've found that implementing small, simple acts of kindness or moments of mindfulness can transform my day-to-day experience. For example, instead of rushing through my morning routine, I now try to take a few minutes to focus on my breath and set a positive intention for the day. It's a small practice, but it helps me feel grounded and focused, rather than scattered or overwhelmed. I've also started taking the time to consciously reflect on what I'm grateful for, whether it's a supportive friend, a meaningful conversation, or even something as simple as a warm cup of coffee. These moments of gratitude have become anchors in my day, reminding me of the positive aspects of my life, no matter how busy or challenging things may get. In addition to mindfulness and gratitude, the Dalai Lama stresses the importance of practicing compassion, both for others and ourselves. This aspect of happiness is something I've had to actively cultivate. I've realized that I tend to be hard on myself, especially when I don't meet my own high expectations or when I face setbacks. It's easy to get caught in a cycle of self-criticism and doubt, which can quickly drain your energy and hinder your productivity. But the Dalai Lama suggests that true happiness comes from extending compassion toward ourselves, not just others. This means forgiving ourselves for mistakes, being patient with our progress, and acknowledging that growth is a continual process. Practicing self-compassion has been a game-changer for me. I've found that when I treat myself with kindness and understanding, I'm more likely to show up for others with the same warmth. And in turn, this creates a positive feedback loop that nurtures both my well-being and my relationships. One of the most powerful takeaways from this chapter is the idea that happiness is not a fixed state, it's something we must actively work to maintain. This notion of happiness as a practice resonates with the way I approach my work and productivity. Just as I wouldn't expect to maintain high productivity without establishing good habits, such as setting clear goals, breaking tasks into manageable steps, and staying organized, I've come to realize that happiness requires similar care and attention. In the same way I schedule time for work or exercise, I now prioritize activities that support my emotional well-being, like journaling, practicing mindfulness, and nurturing relationships. These practices have become non-negotiable parts of my daily routine, not because they're a quick fix, but because they contribute to my overall sense of fulfillment. The Dalai Lama also emphasizes that the practice of happiness is deeply connected to how we engage with the world around us. It's easy to get caught up in the rush of everyday life, constantly moving from one task to the next without ever stopping to reflect. But happiness is rooted in how we engage with the present moment. For example, instead of focusing on the end result of a task, I've learned to appreciate the process itself. Whether I'm working on a project or spending time with family, I try to fully immerse myself in the experience, rather than rushing through it or looking ahead to the next thing. This shift in perspective has helped me find greater satisfaction in the small, everyday moments, rather than constantly chasing after the next milestone. A practical way to start incorporating this daily practice of happiness is to begin with small habits. One of the most effective ways I've found to cultivate happiness is through gratitude journaling. Every morning, I take a few minutes to jot down 3 things I'm grateful for. These can be big or small, but the key is to focus on the positive aspects of my life, no matter how simple they may seem. This practice has shifted my mindset, allowing me to focus on what's going well rather than getting bogged down by challenges or setbacks. Similarly, I've started integrating moments of mindfulness throughout my day. This could be as simple as taking a few deep breaths before starting a meeting or pausing for a moment of reflection after completing a task. These small acts of presence help me stay grounded and focused, rather than overwhelmed or distracted. As I reflect on the Dalai Lama's message in this chapter, I've come to realize that happiness isn't something to be achieved or finished, it's an ongoing journey. By committing to daily practices like mindfulness, compassion, and gratitude, I'm building a foundation of happiness that will sustain me through life's ups and downs. The key isn't to wait for happiness to come to us, but to actively create it through our thoughts, actions, and habits. As we wrap up our exploration of the Dalai Lama's insights on happiness, we've uncovered powerful lessons about how happiness is not an external achievement, but an internal practice. We've learned that it's not about waiting for happiness to find us, but about actively cultivating it within ourselves. From Chapter 3, we discovered that happiness begins with our mindset, and it's through cultivating internal qualities like mental clarity, compassion, and emotional balance that we truly find contentment. In Chapter 4, we saw that compassion, patience, and positive mental habits are foundational to lasting happiness, and how small, kind actions toward others can shift our own emotional state. In Chapter 5, we confronted the obstacles to happiness, anger, fear, and attachment, and learned how overcoming these mental barriers paves the way for true well-being. Chapter 6 reminded us that suffering, though inevitable, can be transformed through perspective, turning challenges into opportunities for growth. In Chapter 7, we explored the crucial role of compassion for others and ourselves, while Chapter 8 taught us how mindfulness and mental discipline are essential tools for cultivating happiness. As we reached Chapter 9, we saw that the relationships we nurture with others play a critical role in our overall happiness, and in Chapter 10, we concluded that happiness is a lifelong practice, shaped by consistent habits like mindfulness, gratitude, and kindness. Ultimately, happiness is not a one-time event but a continual journey, shaped by small, intentional steps we take each day. Whether through practicing mindfulness, showing compassion, or simply taking time to reflect on our blessings, we have the power to nurture happiness from within. The road to fulfillment is ongoing, but every step we take brings us closer to the happiness we seek. So, remember that the pursuit of happiness doesn't require grand gestures, just small, consistent actions that support your well-being. I'd love to hear your thoughts on happiness. What practices have helped you cultivate joy in your own life? Share your experiences in the comments, and if you found this content insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more valuable tips and discussions on personal growth. Let's continue this journey together, one mindful step at a time.